there's already a couple of records of this anyway, Debbie, so there's ones to pick from. Okay.
Okay.
So, all right, guys. So great. So listen, thanks a million for having me here, for hosting me. It is definitely one benefit of the COVID lockdown that I'm able to travel around to different countries from the comfort of my home, and to to talk to different people in there. So this has been done here in Croatia. It's been done in Sweden, and I've presented this in the UK and in Ireland and a few other places. So it's all very good and very easy from my point of view. I'll just give you a quick little bit of background about myself and about this session, and most of the session is going to be very demonstration based, so there's not a lot of PowerPoint slides. There's my Twitter, LinkedIn, and website. Just about me, basically, I've been working with data since 1999, as in Microsoft Data Platform data. Okay, so since SQL version 7 and OLAP Services 7. A lot of that time I've been basically working on the OLAP engine, the reporting services engine, but also doing data warehouse work, integration services work, and other parts of the stack in there as well. I run a couple of user groups like Damir here, and we cooperate on Data Weekender as well. So a few of those things going on, and like to do some talking on data platform topics. I have, with this particular presentation, I have a blog companion with it. So you'll find that up on my website, up in Data Smart, and if you can read that if you just want to find out a little bit more information about what I'm talking about here, really. And as Steve mentioned, he'll be recording this, but actually there's a recording of this presentation already up on YouTube, and you'll find that via the blog as well. Okay, so that's all about me. That's enough about me. So objectives, what I will cover in here. Basically, what I want to talk to you about is my experience of building reporting solutions using Power BI, Power Automate, SharePoint, Office 365, and Teams. Okay, so I'm going to be demoing Power BI, Power Automate, SharePoint, Office 365, and Teams. Okay, I'm not going to be demonstrating anything more. So if you are not interested in seeing any of those working, then you're in the wrong session. Okay, that's what I'm going to be talking about today. Before I get into the demo, let's just have one slide about data projects. Okay, so this is my data projects 101. Most data projects, or certainly most data projects that I'm involved with, tend to have 4 key aspects to it. There'll always be something about getting data out of a system. Okay, so in this context, this is going to be Power Query or M. Then there's going to be something to do with modeling of data. All right, and modeling of data in a brief nutshell is the kind of art and science of getting data out of source systems and then putting it into a shape that suits your reporting needs. So you're turning it on the head. It's about reporting now. And Power BI Desktop is what we're going to be doing to achieve that. There then is the visualization side of the data, which is creating your report basically, which in this presentation is going to be Power BI Desktop and PowerBI.com. And then there's the sharing of the data in there as well, which again is PowerBI.com. So like all kind of data projects tend to have some flavor of those 4 going on, not exclusively. Some projects you can go straight to your database and not really worrying about the modeling side of things, or you're maybe already taking advantage of an existing model. And that's a completely legitimate way of working with data. I suppose I'm more covering it the whole when you're coming from the ground up, what do you have to build? Okay. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. And I've got a demo that I'm going to be showing you in this session, all right? And there's a business requirement behind this demo, and it's very much based upon customers that I work with. It's kind of a combination of a couple of customers. But one of those customers came along and said, look, Mark, we've got our budget data in Excel, all right? We sell product to wholesalers, and all that information is in our company sales database. And then finally, those wholesalers sell products and our competitors' products, obviously, onto consumers. And those wholesalers send back that information to us in Excel sheets, and we call that retail sales. And we want to combine these into a single view. All right. So they kind of came along with that as a requirement. three sources of data, create reports to the users. Company sales, they get it from their ERP system. Their retail sales, they get it from Excel files that are sent on from the retailers. Their budget data, they calculate and they store it in Excel. Okay, so that's what my demo is about. It's about how do we answer that using Power BI, and then how do we kind of further enhance it using Power Automate, Teams, SharePoint.
Mark?
Yeah.
I don't know if it is just problem at my side, but I have a strange echo at your side. So maybe that you turn off the video. Let's try with that.
Turn off the video, no bother. So
okay, let's try in this way. I'm not if the problem is only at my side, but nobody complains except me.
So, okay, so
continue.
everybody else can still hear me okay without the echo, yeah? All good, yeah? So
yes. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I'll keep going on, guys. Okay, so look, here, this is what I'm demoing basically. This is what I'm going to build a solution to this, or at least show you how I built the solution to this, and then show you how we enhance it with other parts of the technology stack. Okay. So phase one, I'm going to be demonstrating 3 phases to you. All right, we'll start with phase 1, which is all about the model it in Power BI. Okay, so Power BI is going to be used to get my data. It's going to be used to model it. It's going to be used to visualize it, and it's going to be used to share it. My architecture will look a bit like this. Okay, so here's my 3 data sources. I've mentioned already: budget, company sales, and retail sales. I have got a 4th one introduced. Okay, and I debated whether I could keep it in this demonstration or not, because I really don't need it, but I'm actually keeping it because it's useful. But this is a real problem for my client, because my client was saying, well, the products that are sold from our ERP system, they use one set of product codes. But when we sell it into the wholesalers and they then go on selling it to retailers and retailers sell it into consumers, it's a completely different product code going on there. So we needed a way, unfortunately, of mapping these 2 product codes together, which means essentially you're talking almost like a master data management principle. So guess what happened? We ended up with another Excel sheet to maintain that list of codes. A little bit of an ugly solution, but I want to keep it in here because I want to talk that through a little bit. So actually I've got 4 data sources: budget, company sales, retail sales, and my master data Excel sheet. Over here on my right, I'm going to have Power BI, and Power BI is going to have my modeling, doing the querying, having my reports. Users are going to be connecting to those reports from their browsers or from their mobile phone. This bit in the middle is an enterprise gateway connector. Okay, it's a service that you install onto your network, and it allows the Power BI service to communicate with on-premise services. Okay, so that's what that bit's in there. So let's get straight into a demo of what that would look like from a Power BI world. All right, so let's kill this down. Sorry, I had a couple of other things up there. Okay, so this is my demonstration machine, and let's first of all just have a quick look at what are my data sources like. Okay, so I obviously didn't go to the trouble of actually setting up an ERP system. I'm just going to use SQL Server Worldwide Importers as my data source here. All right, and if I look specifically in here, I'm going to be interested in a couple of the tables down here. Okay, so this is where my company sales are coming from: a database, a SQL Server database. Let's look at the retail sales. If I go into my retail sales, these are Excel files that are sent from customers, and they're saved then onto a network share. So if I was to go in here, I'm going to see something that looks like this from different retailers for different months of the year. I'm seeing data. If I was to open up any one of those, I will see a basic layout of some information. All right, there's a product code in there, and there's some sales data. Okay, so that's what my retail sales are like, and there's lots of those Excel files building up. This sheet here is my budget file, okay, and laid out in the way that a lot of accountants love to lay out budgets, which is they love to put columns here and have a month on every column, and then fill in a value for all of those columns, and then down there we've got the stock code. Okay, so that's my kind of basic setup. Let's just look at one more one, because I spoke about my master data, and I've got this file here called my product master. And if I open that up, I get something that looks a little bit like this. And it's a very basic just mapping of, well, here's a product code, and I want you to map it to this product code instead. Okay, this product mapping code in here. So just a little bit of basic kind of master data stuff in there. So there's all my 4 data sources. If I was starting from scratch, having never used Power BI before, or maybe more likely have gone to a training course and learned about it, or seen someone show it to me, or just downloaded Power BI and said, go solve that problem, they'll probably start from somewhere like this. Okay, you got to start with getting your data. So remember those 4 things I mentioned. First bit is getting my data, so I got to go get my data. Now, I'm not going to get all the data in here because that will take a little bit of time, but let's just talk through one example of doing it. And I like to go to my budget. So I'm going to go, well, I got to get data from Excel. Fine, I got to browse to my Excel sheet. I got to open up that sheet. And after a couple of seconds in here, Power BI will show up a preview of that Excel sheet. Here you go. So it actually picks up in 2 things. It picks up that there's a data table and also that there's a tab. It doesn't really matter which one I use, but I can see in here that, yes, that is the data that I'm interested in. And then there's always that lovely tempting yellow button, which I very rarely press because we're almost always interested in the button beside it, the transform data, because this is touching on the data modeling. The data is probably rarely in a way that suits me. I'm going to have to do a bit of work to make it work for me. So I'm going to go transform data. So now I've done transform data, I'm brought into a new part of Power BI, and this is actually called Power Query. And I can see it up there, Power Query Editor. Now there's lots of things in here at the moment because this is my full demo, okay? So let's ignore all those sheets politely and look at the one that I've just brought in. And here's my Excel sheet that I was looking at. Over on the right-hand side, there's a couple of steps that we can replay our way through. And that's just kind of keeping a track of what actually happened. I browsed to an Excel sheet. There it is up there. That's the Excel sheet I browsed to. I then selected off a particular part of that Excel sheet. I then, and I didn't realize I did this, but it automatically promoted my headers for me and it did a bit of data type changing in there as well. So sticking with that is great. It's done a bit of work for me. Now I'm going to put on my IT head and kind of go, well, there's a few things that I hate in here. To begin with, I really hate the SKU, but thank God they gave me a stock code. So I'm not interested in SKUs. Let's just remove that column. We don't need to see it. And the next thing that I hate about this Excel sheet is the fact that they've decided to put all of the budget on columns, and that's not how I want to store it. So I'm going to turn around and go, well, do you know what? All those columns, I am going to change them and I'm going to do an unpivot operation, and that happens straight away. So I've unpivoted down. So now I'm getting something a bit more decent from a point of view of a database feel, that I have my stock code, I have my calendar, and I have my value. So let's rename a few things. You're going to call that month. You're going to call this budget value, so as not to confuse it with sales value. I'm happy enough with stock code, and maybe going to change a data type over here, change that to decimal, look at my data, and I might decide at this point, rename it, you know, call this my new budget. And basically, I'm just changing the shape of my data to get it into a form that suits me. All right. Over on the right-hand side again on the Power Query, we've just seen that Power Query has actually just been building up those steps as I've been doing them. So I can go back and I can replay particular steps if I need to do, or insert steps in different locations. And actually what's been done in the background is, if I go to Advanced Editor, it's creating this for me. So this is the M language, and that's what's doing my data transformations. So if you wanted, you could actually go straight in here and start typing in commands in here. And sometimes you'll have to do that because you can't necessarily do all the transformations via the graphical interface. But I do find you can probably do a high 95% of the work graphically, and maybe sometimes you have to go in here if you're doing something a bit more complex. Okay. So that's just a kind of sense of what happens when I start trying to build things inside in Power Query. let's have a quick look at some of the other queries that I have. And I've kind of, you can see how I kind of organize my reports a little bit, because I kind of think in Kimball dimensional modeling when I'm doing Power BI. So I've got some queries that are dimension related. I got some queries that are facts related. I got some queries that I'm simply calling reference queries. So if I was to look at that, say if I was to expand facts, I can see there's some more queries down here. And now I can see, well, I got a query related to my company sales, related to my retail sales, and related to my budget. And if I was to look at, say, the company sales, so great. So here's what my company sales looks like. I look over here. Here are the steps that created that company sale. All right. Source, expand, change type. I go looking at the source. If I was to look at it this way, and actually see what that source is. It's connecting to two different tables. It's connecting to a table called invoice lines and invoice header, and it's joining them together on their invoice ID, left outer, etc. Which means that I've got other queries in here, and I go back and I can find them in my reference queries. And here's my reference query called invoice lines. And if I follow that back over here, you can bring that back to kind of go, okay, here's where it's all started really. Here's a connection to a SQL database. Then the next thing that happened was I saw all the tables of that SQL database. Then I decided to navigate to a particular table, and then I removed some columns from it. So you're very much just building up a kind of a hierarchy of your queries, in this case, connecting to different types of database systems or data sources, doing a bit of manipulation, doing a bit of shaping to try to get your data into that format that suits you for your report. Okay. I just want to do a touch base that everybody can still hear me nice and clearly there and everything's going okay. Amir, you might give me a little thumbs up.
No, it's all okay.
All
Nobody
good.
asks nothing.
That's good.
That's good. It's all clear.
Good. So great. So I've done. So a little bit more work has to happen here, obviously, but you end up that you've got all your data, right? So if we go back to those 4 parts of a data project, the first part is all in this Power Query world. Okay. So I'm going to close that off now. I won't apply my changes. All right, and that brings you back in here, and you're then going to go into the second part, which is the whole get your data, model your data. Now, modeling in this sense is actually pretty straightforward. Okay, it's just about creating relationships between tables. All right, so here's my company sales query, and I've just defined the relationship that exists between company sales and calendar. Over here, I've defined a relationship that exists between customer and company sales. Down here, I've defined a relationship that goes between product and company sales. Okay. If I go looking at my other groups, I can see retail sales in a similar vein. If I go looking at budget, slightly different because my budget didn't have any customer data in it. So budget is only related to calendar and to product. Okay. All combined together, I get this kind of view of the world, where I'm saying, right, here's my company sales, and I can see how it's related to dimensions in the same way I can see how retail sales is related to the same bunch of dimensions and budgets related to the same bunch of dimensions. So you're doing your little bit of modeling work in there, okay? And having done that, you've achieved the second part of your data project. The first part was getting the data. The second part was modeling the data, which means you now get into the whole report creation, okay? And now you start with a blank page somewhere, and I won't be doing anything sophisticated, but basically you put on a control, and you're saying, okay, well, let's look at our retail sales volumes that we're doing. Okay, that's my retail sales volume. Let's look at my budget volume. Okay, there's my budget volume. Let's look at this across the months. Let's rearrange things a little bit, whatever has to be done. Okay, and you kind of end up with, hopefully, a report that starts doing what you need it to do for yourself. Okay, so you're in your visualization side of things. Let's look at the visuals I've created. They're not exactly particularly sophisticated, but they are just a report. And again, it's showing you the whole natural Power BI way of working with things, that when you click on things, they all slice around. I want to draw your attention to that figure 47K, because that's going to be my test case later on. That reads 47K. Later on, that should increase to 51K. Okay. So this is my visualization side, and I'm deliberately really being very, very quick and rapid on this one because I'm not trying to teach you how to create visualizations. We're just showing how we go through the logical process of I got my data in Power Query, I modeled my data inside my modeling pane, I created my visualizations inside in my reporting plane, and then I finally share it, which means I'll go to publish. I'll publish to Power BI. Yes, I'll save my changes. I'm still going to apply them later. And it now shows me my Power BI workspace, and I can turn around and publish that into a particular workspace. So having done all that, I still haven't put it in front of my users, right? All of this has been me working in Power BI desktop. So the last bit is I got to share with my users, okay? And initially, the way that's going to be shared with your users is they're going to go to something. They're going to go to powerbi.com. You're going to tell them, here, log on to powerbi.com, or you might send them a link to it. They'll get in. They'll see something that looks like this. Depending on who they are, they'll see different things. In my case, I'm going to go straight into this thing called Reboot Your Analytics. And inside there, I can see I've got a book of sales called Sales V1. And I click on that, and it brings me to my report. And now my users can interact with my report. All right. I actually want to do one thing quick because I know that's already on 51K. So I actually just want to do a quick process of my report because I want to reset that back to the 47K. All right. Apologies, I forgot to reset that one earlier. Okay, refresh is still going on at the moment. I'll check it there. But this is how this is basically how my end users would start interacting with this report in there. Okay, let's do a refresh again. I should hope they've kicked in by now. Yeah, so no, my report is back to the 47K figure, which is where I want it to be for now. So that's my report. I've shared it out to my end users. As such, job done, right? So let's go back to the PowerPoint and kind of have a talk about what we actually did do in there. All right. So we did this, we got our data, we modeled it, we visualized it, we shared it. That's the whole section in there. We did the demo. What we've ended up with is a single Power BI solution. All right. It's effective, all right, in that it has answered my customer's problem. I have combined 3 sources of data together. I have created a report. I have shared it out with users, but it feels very standalone. Okay. It feels like, okay, we're going to another website in here now, which feels a little bit odd for users the first time, for end users. And then they're kind of going, it's nothing to do with my company, yet it's got my company information in there. So it just feels a little bit isolated going on there. All right. We also had to do a little bit of additional data maintenance to make it work in there as well. All right. So I want to see, can I improve on this? It's the first time I've done a bit of work. I want to see, can I improve on this the next time when I go near this type of project in there? Which brings me into phase 2. So phase 2, redesigning and start leveraging Office. Power BI still plays a very big role in this. It's still extract, model, and visualize. But now I want to introduce something called data flows. One of the big problems with the Power BI approach I showed you there is that a day will come along when you'll have to create your second Power BI model, okay? And you'll now kind of go, okay, I need some of the same data in my second Power BI model that already exists in my first Power BI model. So now you got the question of, well, do I have to recreate my code? The code might be simple, it might be complex, but either way, it is code, right? We saw that M language. If I'm going to have to recreate that, then suddenly I've got code in 2 different locations. And if I find that I have to make a change to one, then I got to remember I got to make a change to a second. All right. So we all know that's not a good way of working. So data flows is a way of actually trying to solve that problem where you kind of go, well, actually, I want to take my concept of data like company sales and abstract it out of my Power BI book and share it up into Power BI as its own little object. Then whenever I want to use it in multiple Power BI models, I can just say, hey, get my data from company sales, which is already in Power BI. All right. So we're going to do a little bit of data flow to share our data. I want to use Excel in here as an ad hoc tool. because in Power BI, a user can create their own report, and we'll demo that again in phase 2. But also sometimes if they want to get a real ad hoc with their data, then there's nothing like using Excel. And inevitably, they're going to export this data to Excel anyway. So let's try to embrace that. Let's see how we can kind of use Excel effectively. And then finally, because my organization, say, has SharePoint and Teams, we're kind of going, well, it might make sense to utilize those, both from a point of view of maintaining data and also from a way of me sharing my reports with users. So now my architecture looks a little bit like this. So I still have these 3 data sources, but I've got rid of the 4th one, the master data. Now, I still need my master data, but I've moved it somewhere. I've moved it to a SharePoint list. And we all know what Excel is like, right? Especially for maintaining something like master data. Someone one day inserts a column, deletes a column, and everything breaks. Okay, so at the very least, by kind of going into a SharePoint list, I'm putting into a more controlled area. I can lock it down. It's a more rigid layout in there. It just feels like, while it's still an easy solution, it feels like it's a better way of doing that. Now, this means as I'm using SharePoint, I might also use the SharePoint page as a way of actually connecting to Power BI, okay? Because that kind of makes sense, because maybe my company are already SharePoint users. Over here, I have the Excel route where I'm saying, well, I'm going to have users, and sure, they can connect to Power BI via the browsers, but I also want to give them options to connect to it directly inside an Excel. And actually, I'd love if they could use Teams on top of all this as well. So we're bringing a few more things into this, okay? So let's get into a demo and talk through how that would look. Before I kick into that, I'll do a quick touch base back with G. Any questions from the first part of it? Or are you good for me to drive on into the second part?
No, it's pretty much quiet.
Okay.
If somebody wants to ask a question, now is the time.
You don't worry, we can come back and do it again, but just or send in a chat or raise a hand if something pops in there as well. All right. Okay, let's go back to my environment. So here's my V1 version of it. I'm going to flick over to V2, and now I'm going to bring that down, and I'm going to bring us back to Power BI, and we're going to exit out of here. So first of all, let's talk about data flows. All right. So in the first version, I use Power BI to connect directly to my data sources. In this way of doing it, I actually want to turn around and create a data flow. And here is a data flow created, one called company sales. And you can see how it's a different icon from the models. So these are models, these are flows. I click into company sales. I can see the company sales as an entity, just a single entity called company sales. And this is what will be returned from this. And I can go in and edit my entity. And after a couple of seconds, this is going to open up Power Query in the cloud. You can see it right there, Power Query. And this is pretty much the same interface that I was showing you inside in Power BI, except now it exists up in powerbi.com. And as before, we get our steps. And I can replay steps back and forth between them. I can add in new steps. I can do all the sorts of manipulation that I was able to do before, except it's all up as a service. Having created that, I can then set that to refresh. It can refresh independently of my Power BI model. It can have a different refresh schedule. But when I want to get that data, I go into Power BI and I go, okay, get my data. Except this time, I'm getting my data from a Power BI data set. Connecting to my set. Sorry, excuse me, get data. Data flows. Apologies. I was saying data set. I should have said data flow. My apologies about that. So my Power BI data flow has been created. And I go in here, I can explore through, and there I see my entity called company sales. And I can click on it. It'll run up a preview. And in this case, because my data is actually correct, I actually don't have to hit the transform data. I could just actually go straight into the load button here, right? And it would just turn around and kind of go, okay, I'm going to load in company sales and bring it into my model. So a question that you would that I would get asked here is, where is it actually getting that data from, all right? And it kind of gives you a clue there. It pulled down a 35 meg file, okay? It's actually connecting to data lake. So when a Power BI data flow runs, it runs in Power BI, it extracts data out of data sources, but it's got to put that final shape of data somewhere. All right. So if you configure nothing, it will put it into Power BI's own data lake area. Okay, you're part of the data lake, but specific to Power BI. You can, if you want, actually configure that so that it will put it into your data lake. So if you had a data lake up in Azure, you could use data flows as a way of actually putting data right into your data lake, and it will sit there as blob objects sitting inside your data lake. So when I then connect to it from Power BI Desktop, it's connecting to that data flow, which contains data inside the data lake and a blob object, and it just pulls down that blob object. So it actually can be a very quick way of working with Power BI Desktop from a development point of view, that if you did have a data flow created, every time you're actually doing a refresh, it just pulls down the blob object as opposed to going back to the source system, which might take significantly longer depending on what's going on. All right. So let's go looking at my queries. Now that I've pulled down that object in there called Data Lake Sales 2, I can see it here in my other queries. And here's the data I had in the blob. And I look over here in my steps, and I've just got two steps, two very simple steps. One, source. It's just connected to Power BI data flows. And the second one was just a navigation to kind of go, hey, pick out a specific data flow. So that's how I'm going to get data out of data flows. But it also throws up the question of how would I migrate something to a data flow? All right. So say I've already done work to get my data in. Well, I want to create a data flow. So I'll go back to my V1. I'll go looking at my queries that I had here. All right. And say the budget one. I'm kind of going, well, I want to put that now up onto Power BI because I want to share this code amongst other objects. All right. The easiest one, a nice simple way of doing it is go to Advanced Editor and just copy that code. Copy that code out of there. So now I go up in here, and I'm going to add an entity. And you can step through and do it, but in my case, I'm going to accept a blank query, and it shows the basic code, and now I paste back in. And that's pretty much it. I've pretty much migrated my code in there. In this case, I'd have a couple of more steps to do. I would have to set up file sources and a few things like that. So maybe there are a couple of extra steps, but you don't have to go recreating every single step that you have in there. You can basically cut and paste your code up there, get it working, and you'll save it off, and you'll have your objects up in Power BI. Okay. So let's flick back to my V2. What else is different in here? That was talking about data flows. I wanted to talk about the master data. I've shown you already my product master data in there in the Excel sheet. So let's look at what I've done here. Okay, I'm going to go into a SharePoint page, into a SharePoint site. And I got into a SharePoint site, and inside that SharePoint site, there is a list, and there's a list called Retail Product Map. And down here, here's my stock item ID, and here's my relevant map code. So now that I'm inside in this environment, it's quite straightforward for me to add on new specific items onto things in here, or I can go into a quick edit mode if I've got a lot of things that I want to do changes to in there. More importantly, I can make this safe, I can make this secure, I can restrict down access onto it, etc. I could even turn around and start using Power Apps or Automate on it to actually start creating flow processes and approval windows behind that as well. Okay, so I've migrated my data away from Excel and put it into SharePoint Online, which just feels a little bit more secure, which obviously means then I got to bring it into Power BI, right? So in Power BI, I can go, okay, well, I'll just go to my Sales V2 and new data source and SharePoint Online. SharePoint Online Services. SharePoint Online exists as a source that you can start pulling your data to. I won't step through the whole part of it, but let's just look at the ones that I've created. You can see up here I've had one called Retail Map, and I've just put an SP in front of it for SharePoint. So I click on that, and you can see here how this has got my master data in it. But if I go back to my source step, you can see in my source step how it's been connecting to SharePoint, and then the rest of it is the normal Power BI stuff. I saw all of the lists that were available. I can go on, I can navigate to look at a particular one. I can rename columns, I can change types, I can pull stuff out. And I got that exact same data shape that I had before coming from Excel, except now I'm getting it from a SharePoint world. All right. The rest of this is the same. If you've done it right, you shouldn't even have to make any changes to your data model, because my data model is the same as it was before. So really all I've done in here is I've done a bit of re-engineering in the background to kind of go use data flows because that's a better way of sharing data, and use SharePoint because that feels like a better way of bringing in my master data. Okay. You would then turn around and you would publish that up to SharePoint, or sorry, publish it up to Power BI as normal. So let's go back to Power BI for a second. So right, I'm inside in Power BI world. I'm going to stick with my V1 just because it's up there. A user now might say, well, I want to create my own report in there. Okay, and that's always an option for them to do. All right, they can turn around and kind of go, well, go select new report, create a report. I see lots of things because I have access to lots of stuff. Depending on who you are, you might see more or less. I'm going to go selecting up my sales V1. I'm going to select create a report. And now I'm in a blank area, and I'll just go back to my very simple, very basic. Let's just go looking at products by stock item name or something like that. Right, there's all my stock item names, and let's throw on retail sales, etc., etc., and I can get to a report on there. And as an end user, I could turn around and I could save this off, and a new report. Save that off. That report's been saved. I go back in here, and I can see up here, here's a copy of my new report. All right, they can go back in and get to their data. So that's one way of always available to a user to create their own report, well, if they've been given permissions. Another option available to them, though, is this, to kind of go up here and go, well, let's analyze this data in Excel. And we see in here, it threw up a message saying create an Excel file. Now it's got another one saying it's ready to download. And if I look down here, here's an Excel file. So I'm going to click on that. I'm going to open that up. I got a couple of buttons to click: enable editing, enable content. And now I've got a pivot table. All right. And I can see my pivot table over here. I can see my model over here. This is the Power BI model that I've been creating. And I can turn around and kind of go, okay, show me stock item. There's stock name. Let's just show me the code in there as well, and the unit price. It's a pivot table. So let's change the layout a little bit of it. Put that in tabular layout. Turn off all the subtotals and stuff like that because I don't want it. And I'm basically creating a report, except now I'm in full Excel mode with a live connection to my Power BI data set. So when Power BI refreshes, this refreshes as well. This isn't an export of data. This is data that's a live connection going on there. So from an analyst's point of view, it feels like, okay, I'm really actually beginning to get closer to my data now. I can work with my data in Excel as opposed to creating reports in Power BI, which might be a great solution. And then the last bit then was we were saying, well, can we actually, how do we change the sharing of this to people? Because do they still have to go to Power BI to get the reports? Can we do it in a different way? And we can. So I can go back to my SharePoint, and I'm going to go back to my home page. And this is my SharePoint homepage that I have for this site. And you can see in there how it's rendering a whole bunch of Power BI reports, including my Sales V1 report. So now I'm kind of bringing that report closer to my end users. All right. If they're already using SharePoint for other reasons, you're suddenly going, oh, we can just get that report right in SharePoint. That saves you going to Power BI. And you can also do interesting things like these ones at the top. These are actually different Power BI reports. This guy is coming from the same model as here, but these two guys are actually capturing Twitter traffic. Okay, so I've been capturing the hashtag Brexit for the last year and running it through Azure Cognitive Services. So this is just basically telling me the average sentiment for the last 10 tweets versus overall time in there, okay? But it's just showing you how you can actually start mixing and matching different Power BI reports in a SharePoint environment. Or what if you wanted to bring it closer again, okay? What if we wanted to go into Teams, all right, and go, well, inside in Teams, I've got a Teams area in here, normal Teams stuff. I can have files, I can have wikis, I can all the certain stuff you want. And then I can also click on this. I can click on Sales V1, and this is running a Power BI report for me directly inside in Teams. And it's the same report that we've been looking at all of this time. And this brings in the nice fact that I can now turn around and actually, Damir, do you exist on my network? Did I get rid of you yet? Yeah, I think I did. So, but I can turn around and start messaging people inside in the organizations, and they'll start getting notifications on their side that I'm engaging in conversation with them about data that I'm looking at inside the Teams environment from Power BI. So let's go back to the PowerPoint. So that was redesign and leverage Office. We did our demo. So there's a lot of new things that I like in here. I like the fact that I got a single data source for multiple models in the context of company sales, in context of data sharing, and keeping my code safe. It's inside in data lake. Some nice things about that. I like the fact that I've introduced in SharePoint Online for data maintenance, because I do find a lot of times with data projects, we end up with having to maintain little bits and pieces of data around the place. So it's nice to be able to kind of put that into some sort of structured place without having to write your own system to do it, okay? So obviously, if you had a dedicated master data management solution, you'd probably go towards that. I've got a SharePoint dashboard in there, which is great. I've got my pivot tables that I can use in Excel, and we've seen teams that work in there as well. So overall, it seems like my solution feels more mature now, even though I actually haven't added on a lot of work. It didn't take a lot of time to add in those new elements, but it feels like it's a more rounded, mature solution. So let's get on to phase 3. And this is my automation phase. What I want to introduce in here basically is Power Automate, because there's another little rough edge that exists, which was those retail sales. So if you can remember about the retail sales, I was saying they came from retailers telling the company, this is how much of your product and your competitors' products that we've sold in our stores. That's sent via an email, with an Excel attachment. So someone's got to receive that email. Okay, someone's got to detach the attachment, they got to save it onto a file share, and then hope that everything works. And then that person will take holidays and it won't happen for a few weeks, or they're out sick, or they're really busy. And it's just one of those things that might get missed from time to time. So what we've done is we've introduced Power Automate into the mix. And Power Automate is a way can tap into lots of things, but one of the things it can tap into is Office 365 email accounts. So I can go to an email account. When an email arrives, take the attachments, detach it, put it onto the network share. It can then also turn around and connect to Power BI and say, oh, by the way, refresh the data set now that new data has come in there. And then just for a little bit of fun, I've also said, hey, let's put Twitter in here as well, and we'll get a bit of Twitter work going on. All right, so that's my automate side of things. So let's demo this. Okay, so I'm going to bring you to. So to get to this, you go to flow.microsoft.com, because it used to be called Flow. All right, I've got a couple of flows in here. So I'm going to open up my one called here called Reboot. Let's click on this. And this pulls up some basic information about it. There's the last time that it ran for me, all successful. I look up in here. It's got connections to a few different systems. Great. That's me. That's who created. There's details about it. If I go looking in and editing it, here's my basic flow. When an email arrives, so that's my trigger. When an email arrives, which means I got to supply it a connection. So at the moment, this has got a connection to my Office 365 email. So when an email arrives into that account, when it arrives into my inbox, and it's from markjohnhayes@gmail.com, and it contains the subject filter reboot. So basically, when that happens, trigger. What does it do then? Well, trigger having happened, I want to apply to each attachment in that email. Okay, I want to do something to each attachment. What do I want to do? I want to create a file. I look at the connection for my file. It's making a connection to my Reboot Retail Sales. So this is kind of interesting. If you remember that enterprise gateway connector that we had, this guy here, let's pop it up on the screen briefly. This enterprise gateway connector we show it here working in a mode of data going up to Power BI. However, it can also be used as a way for the Power Platform to push data back down to on-premise. So in this case, this flow is kicking in, and when it does receive an attachment, it will actually write that down onto retail sales via the Enterprise Gateway connector. So it actually can be used as a two-way object. Okay. So in this case, for each attachment that comes in, it writes it down onto file share. And then when it's successfully done that, it will do the last part, which is connect to Power BI and do a refresh. And there's my workspace and there's my data set I want to refresh on. And there's my connection. Okay, so that's my flow in there to do a little bit of automation. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm now going to trigger that flow and hopefully it will all run. So this is my Gmail. I've got an email ready to go to myself with Reboot in there. Here's my two attachments. I'm going to press send. That's off on its way. I'm now going to go back to my network, to my on-premise environment. And if I go into retail sales at the moment, we'll see that there's no December file in here. Okay, there should be two files arriving shortly enough. Okay, they normally arrive around about now, so hopefully they will be here very shortly. I've just heard a beep in my ear, which means the email's been received. And now I'm beginning to panic. Oh, it worked. Great. So you can see there, a December file has arrived just there, and a December file has arrived just there as well. So the flow kicked in, detected the email, took the attachments, detached them, put them onto my network share. It then also should have connected to Power BI. So I'll go to my data flows. I got sales V1, and if I look at the refresh time of that, that is just now, so that is just refreshed. I go to edit my data flow and do a refresh here. We'll see that, yes, it has successfully run. Yeah, it did take a bit longer than normal. Normal is 2 seconds. No, it took 10 seconds. That was my 8 seconds of panic that happened. So it has refreshed. And finally, if I go back to my actual page here and repage, my 47 figure should hopefully now have changed to 51 or 52 or something like that. There you go, 51. So you can see how it has successfully picked up that flow, run it through, done the whole refresh, done the detachment, everything with it. While I'm still with the flows, let's just pop in and look at, say, that reboot one, just give you another flavor of it. So this is a sentiment analysis. So this is running continuously, right? So, you know, this ran not so long ago. It's got different connections going on in here. It's got a connection to Azure Cognitive Services as well as to an Azure database, okay? And if I go in looking at the edit of this one, now I got a trigger. The trigger this time is when a tweet is posted that contains the hashtag Brexit, and that's connecting to my Twitter account. It then runs that through a detect sentiment that will connect to my Cognitive Services account. And then it will then connect into SQL Server Azure. So that's my connection to my SQL Server Azure account over there. And it's passing in into that table, and it's passing in all the information about the tweet, including the score sentiment that came out of it. So it just gives you kind of another way that you can use the data or use flow. And that's where those numbers are coming from, the 47 or the 43 and the 49. All right, so I'll just a touch more in flow there. So pop out, bring back up. So that was the whole automation phase. So we've done our demo of it, and look, the main thing in here is obviously we've managed to successfully automate file load and refresh, and we had a little bit of fun with sentiment in there as well. But now from a kind of complete package point of view, I feel now I got something that I can kind of say to my customer is pretty mature, all right? It's got their model, it's answered their first question, which was, can you combine 3 data sources together to allow us to do reports? Yes, you can do that, except we've now added on also the ability for them to do ad hoc analysis in Excel on those reports, to connect with via Teams, so they're in a very much collaborative environment, to maintain things inside in SharePoint lists and to look data in there as well. John is happy that he no longer has to detach his files because that's all being automated for him in there as well. All right. So there's a lot of things to kind of like about the solution in there now. And I mean, I think your customer ends up in a kind of in a happier place rather than just a pure Power BI only solution in there. Okay. And then phase 4, of which I have nothing to demo on, but I suppose it's just kind of really showing where this fits, is this basically has been part of, not the whole, but part of the Power Platform. Okay, so we've seen the Power BI side, and obviously it's key. We've seen the Power Automate side, and which is how I got my data out in there. We've seen how we can use SharePoint, Excel, and Office 365 in conjunction with it. But we can also add in other things. If you're a Microsoft Dynamics environment, then you can get another level of integration between Power BI and Dynamics. You can start using Power Apps if you need some form development on top of it, virtual agents. We saw the connectors onto objects. There's a whole bunch of different things that all kind of work together, of which I've just shown you part of it working together, not even the whole lot of it working together. And that's what it is. That is the Power Platform being used in conjunction with Office 365. So conclusions. Using this, you can meet lots of different reporting and analytical needs. You don't have to be IT to do a lot. This is kind of interesting, right? Because it's and I get asked this a lot. How do we start using Power BI? Or more interestingly, actually, Power BI is the only reporting technology that I've worked with where it hasn't been IT have asked me to do the work. All right. Now, sometimes it's an IT person asks me to do the work, sure. But I've been contacted by finance people, by chief financial officers. I've been contacted by CEOs, business owners, etc. Basically, people who have data problems to solve, who go out and try to look for a solution. They see Power BI. They might start using it a little bit, realize that maybe they need a bit of help, and then they kind of contact people like me about it. All right. And in some cases, some of these customers have actually got quite far. Okay. They've managed to successfully connect to their databases. Without involving IT. They've managed to create reports without involving IT. But then at some point in time, they fall into a trap, and it's generally something to do with the data modeling part of it. Okay. There's they're trying to do something, and it's like, well, your database just won't allow you to do that. You're going to have to start changing the shape a little bit to enable that one. Maybe we're going to have many-to-many joins. Maybe you got distinct counts going on. Maybe you got to start looking at DAX. Maybe you got to start writing your own M. All right. So you don't have to be IT to start, but data projects do kind of get complicated quite quickly, in which case it's kind of good when IT are involved in there. But that does throw up the interesting question of how do maybe larger organizations approach it, even from an adoption, because do they want it to be IT centrally controlled, or do they want to allow end users and super users and analysts to create their own solutions? And generally they'll say yes, but you still have to support them. You still have to help them in that whole process in there, so it's still collaborative. You could already own some of this stuff. Okay, so Power BI obviously has a license associated with it. And if you've never used Power BI or your organization hasn't, then you'll end up buying that. But your organization may already be paying for an Office 365 license, in which case the whole pivot table, SharePoint, portals, and Teams and Automate kind of is already there. You might just not be using it. All right. And I suppose speaking of cost, Power BI is a software as a service cost. All right. So you pay per user unless we want to discuss premium. Okay, now this is interesting because that can get ridiculously expensive or be amazingly cost effective. All right. I have clients who aren't small companies by any manner of means. They turn over 10, 15, 20 million a year. But the reality is, through the nature of their business, they'll never have more than maybe 5 or 6 people that they'll want to run reports. All right, that they'll want to do a bit of analysis, who would need a model. Okay. So without Power BI in the mix, if you were looking in the Microsoft stack, you then would have been talking to them about SQL Server, right? And you've been probably talking to them about the enterprise edition of SQL Server to get all the good analysis services stuff and reporting services stuff. So before your conversation starts, when you start your conversation and they ask about money, you're already saying, well, you're going to have to buy an enterprise license. That's going to cost several thousands. And straight away, they'll start doing the maths and kind of go, we've only got 6 users. That's going to be expensive. All right. Now the conversation with them in a Power World is completely different. You're saying, okay, in a Power BI, it's $8.50 per user per month. Okay, so your 6 users is going to cost you what, €50 a month? Completely different dynamic, a completely different kind of conversation to start with them. Yes, obviously, they might still have to get some consultancy services, development services, but from a whole license point of view, it's completely different. Now, conversely, if they turn around and say, I've got 200 users, now it's not so cheap anymore, right? I mean, now we're talking 850 by 200, which is one of the awkward areas, because at least if they're up at the 500 or 600 users, you can start having conversations around Power BI Premium, which is a different way of licensing the product in there. All right. So it can vary in there, but to me, it's actually opened up. I have some very significant customers, one in particular who will always deal in thousands, who will always have 100 users, always have 1,000 users. But it's opened up the whole smaller companies who are very significant, but they've got 5 users, 10 users. And it's opened up that as a line of business and as a way of helping those companies improve. So that's it, actually. I think, Damir, just took about the hour. That's what my whole thing's about, really. I'm happy to take any questions you have, or any feedback, or any observations about it. And again, to thank you for your time, and thank you for tuning in to listen to me.